Okay, so I thought I'd do a little video on defensive shields. So, myself and a couple other guys that I found that live not too far from me, we've been playing Star Wars for about last year. For me, it was the first time I played Star Wars since the 90s. One other guy, him also. And then the third guy, he's actually played for a couple of years, so he was pretty helpful in helping us with the game and stuff. But I thought I would go over defensive shields a little bit because there's just not a lot of resources out there about defensive shields. And if you've never used them before, it can definitely be a bit intimidating going from not using defensive shields to using defensive shields. So, like for myself, again, playing for about 10 months or so, played 6 or 7 months where I played just Decipher cards only. We did not use defensive shields. And then this summer, there's been some tournaments here, in-person tournaments here in the Twin Cities that I wanted to play in. And Saturdays would be Decipher only cards, but with defensive shields. And then Sundays were the open format with all of the virtual cards from the Players Committee. The Players Committee is still making. If you didn't know that, there are cards still being created. They are made by the Players Committee. If you want to look into it a little bit more, just Google SWCCG Players Committee and go to their website, and you can see a lot of the cards and stuff. So anyway, defensive shields, they weren't actually made until the Reflections 3 set, which was one of the last sets that Decipher made, and they do a lot of things to balance the game. Instead of banning cards, Decipher and the Players Committee they created these defensive shields instead. So they just didn't ban cards like most other card games do, cards that were too powerful and stuff like that. So they made defensive shields instead. And so this is the starting effects that you were first created to use defensive shields. So you can put 10 cards from outside your deck face down under this starting effect, and then 3 times per game they play a defensive shield from here as if from hand. So technically you could put any card you wanted to underneath these cards, but the only cards you could play from them were defensive shields. A lot of defensive shields are the effects that you may be familiar with. They just decided that instead of relegating those space in your decks for those effects that kind of do things against certain cards or certain strategies, they decided they would make these defensive shields so that you wouldn't have to place a lot of spots in your deck to defend against certain cards or certain cards or certain strategies that may be overpowered. So these are the original starting effects. There was also about 15 or so, give or take 1 or 2, that original defensive shields that were created. I'll give you an example. Allegations of Corruption is one of the original defensive shields, and it's still played all the time. It's one of probably the most played defensive shield. It helps you deal with interrupts that may be too powerful. One thing you might notice is that in tournament decks and stuff, people only play, typically the maximum, they only play 2 to 3 copies of any one interrupt, and it's because of this defensive shield. Because this defensive shield this is what's called a grabber. You can play it down, and then if opponent plays an interrupt that you don't like, that you want to do a little something about or make it a little bit harder for them, you use a force to stack the interrupt here, and then to play any new interrupt of the same name, player must first stack it here and use +1 force for each interrupt in stack, even if it's normally free. So, like powerful used interrupts, for example, instead of them going back into your deck, which is what you want to happen if they're really good and powerful, they have to go on top of this defensive shield so you don't get them back in your deck. And then if you're going to play additional copies of it, those will also go on this card, and then you have to pay more force for them. So, you definitely can't it makes it tougher if you're playing a deck that has like 6 or maybe even 8 copies of one really good interrupt. This card is going to make it really hard on that. And then you've got like Battle Order. You've got here's the light side version of that grabber shield. You've got Battle Order. So this shield makes it harder for people to go just ground or just space, for example. They kind of made it so that if you're going to go that direction, you're going to have to spend more resources on force draining. Initiated force drain, the player must use 3 force unless a player occupies a battleground site and a battleground system. So it gives you a little bit of a incentive to continue to play both space and ground in your deck. This defensive shield gets played all the time, and there's a light side version of it also. We got secret plans. If you're going to retrieve X force, opponent must first use X force. So that retrieval is canceled. It's pretty commonly used too. So then let's see. Oh yeah, so then the players committee. Oh, and by the way, so playing shields, I mean, you really so you play the starting effect out, and just so you know, you do have the starting effect does count as one of the cards in your deck. So you have the starting effect plus 59 cards in your deck. And then, but the defensive shields that you put underneath the starting effect themselves do not count towards your 60 card deck. So that's kind of nice. So then the players committee, they created their own starting effect for defensive shields, and that is what people use, now in the open format tournaments or the virtual card tournaments. We also actually, though. One thing with our Decipher only tournaments we played this summer, that was one of the rules, was that you could use this starting effect. So we use I kind of had to learn the defensive shields and the starting effect, and it was also my first time going into virtual cards, which I have found to be pretty fun now. I enjoy playing. I do now that I've kind of made the transition to figuring out the virtual cards and the defensive shields. I do definitely enjoy playing with the virtual cards. It's just different, and it's a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of a process to kind of get to know it all. But because it's a lot more cards to get added in, and then with defensive shields, it just adds a lot to knowing what is going to be good. Defensive shields impact things immensely, so it's going to change a lot as far as what is good and what isn't. I can tell you that that's what I've learned. So anyway, this starting effect, the dark side and light side version, you can, instead of just doing 10 defensive shields like the original, you can put all the defensive shields under here, and then you can play 4 defensive shields per game instead of just 3. So it adds an extra defensive shield that you can use. Plus, originally, like I said, I think I said there was about 15 defensive shields that were originally made. There are now 23 for each light side and dark side. If I'm off on that, somebody let me know, because then that means I'm missing one. But anyway, 23 shields total now, and you can use you can use 4 of those 23 shields during one game whenever you want to now. So important to know that when you're playing defensive shields, they do need to, if your opponent does something, the defensive shield does need to already be out for it to impact what they're doing. So you can't really, if somebody does something, you can't just play a defensive shield in reaction to it. It already has to be out there. But you can, but otherwise you can play defensive shields at basically any point during the game. So you just kind of, you see something's going on that you think you might want this defensive shield out for, you just put it out there. The grabber that grabs the interrupts, one of the first things you're probably going to do every game is put this one out so that you've got this out. Whenever somebody plays an interrupt that you would like to grab with it. Let's see. So one of the things that I learned pretty early, my Decipher only decks, if you watch my videos, a lot of them all have mobilization points in them. Here's a shield that specifically suspends the mobilization points effect. Unless opponent occupies a battleground system, mobilization points is suspended. So that was kind of a bummer, because definitely made force generation in some of my decks a lot harder. It impacted my AT-AT deck a lot, because the force generation with that AT-AT deck is a little bit rough if I don't get to use mobilization points, especially early on. So that's again, these defensive shields can really impact things quite a bit. Let's see. We got Goldenrod. It's used a lot. I'm kind of pulling out some of the ones that get used a lot. Opponent must use 2 force instead of, if they're going to play a character Starship Vehicle for free, except by that card's own game text. The opponent must first use 2 force. That's used quite a bit because there's some things that do things to playing stuff for free. Here's one that gets played a lot. This is when while you occupy a battleground, opponent occupies less than 2 battlegrounds. Cancel force drains at non-battleground locations and opponent's force retrieval. So they definitely make you. There are definitely a lot of shields that do things to encourage you to be using battleground or fighting. I should say probably the best way to say it is fighting over battleground sites or systems. Like a lot of what the shields do, besides just making certain cards or strategies less powerful, the other thing that they do is they definitely promote people fighting at sites and systems, so that they make sure that fighting is still a big part of the game. There were definitely some strategies where people were just essentially playing solitaire, where they'd set up their strategy and were able to win the game without having to or barely interacting with the opponent at all. And that's it's not really the way the game should be played, probably. So defensive shields do a good job of that. So like I said, this one makes you occupy some battlegrounds. Oh yeah, and then we've got the shield that makes a sense and alter. If you played in the early stage of the game, sense and alter were just massive parts of the game. So there'd be giant sense battles where if you were the one that had a sense, you're the last one to sense something, or you might each you and your opponent may play 2 or 3 senses. Your sense and your opponent's sense, and just to try and get a good interrupt through. So this kind of takes a little bit of that away from sense and alter, a little bit of that power where they're not as you can definitely still play senses, and I definitely do still play sense, at least one sense in a lot of my decks, but there's not those big sense battles like there used to be anymore, because losing 2 force each time you have a successful sense starts to add up. Yeah, I don't know. And then there's a lot of other shields. Like, if you want to look into it, look up some shields and start getting used to them and give it a go. Make that transition. It can be fun. And then while I'm recording here, I might as well. I really have not opened any packs since I started playing the game again, but I do have some extra packs now that I kind of want to open. So I think let's just go. I'm going to go ahead and open a Premier. I'm going to open a Premier Limited pack and a Hoth pack. Premier Limited, just because who does that? Should be great. Wouldn't it be awesome to pull a Vader? Let's see if we can get lucky here. And then Hoth, probably my favorite set. The Battle of Hoth and the AT-ATs is like my favorite. I love that part about Star Wars. So AT-ATs might be my favorite. Maybe my favorite thing about Star Wars for some reason. But yeah, let's see if we can get us a sweet Darth Vader. Okay, I'm not sure which. Okay, not sure where the rare is exactly, so we'll just go through it here. Combined attack, little barrier. Okay, so I think that the rare here was, is it Solo Han, I think? Probably. Anyway, Solo Han is definitely a backing card for one of the virtual Han Solos, I believe. So anyway, not terrible, but it's never not much fun getting an effect in there. So let's see here. All right, I could also use some more Hoth cards just in general. There's a lot of backing cards for virtual cards that are Hoth cards, and I don't actually have a ton of Hoth cards. So let's see here. What do we want here? Maybe a Veers. That'd be cool. I'll switch off. Oh, well, love this card in my Battle Droid deck. Let's see. Is that the rare? That might be the rare. Let's see. Cool. Oh, that's a cool looking. Just a couple of very cool looking cards. Yeah, I swear Hoth has just some of the best looking cards. Like those are just so cool. Even fallback too. It's just so cool. So anyway, thanks everybody. Have a good one.